we opened, and then within 3 months we were closed again because we had a second lockdown. So it was very like open, close, open, close. It was like the lowest period of my life, I'd say. I had a month between finding out I was on the show and leaving. And in that month, it was just dedicated to prepping so I could leave. And, it was hard because I couldn't tell people where I was going. One of my clients thought I'd been in prison. That was quite funny. It's the toughest thing I've ever done. It was tougher than setting up my business. Straight to the boardroom and you're all introducing yourselves. After the final 5 interviews, I packed my bag.
This is the Leeds Business Podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Fraser. This week, I'm delighted to have Apprentice winner and North Studio owner Rachel Woolford as my guest. Rachel explains all about launching her boutique gym just weeks before lockdown and the stress it caused her, reveals the secrets from behind the scenes of The Apprentice, tells us all about her time on the show, and shares what it's really been like since she was announced as the winner. Before we start, I have one simple request of you. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on the app that you're listening to this on. That's it. Thank you very much. So, let's go. I think you're going to love this episode. On today's Leeds Business Podcast, we have the North Studio owner, Rachel Woolford, better known as Rachel, the winner of this year's Apprentice. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Phil. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. We've got a TV superstar on the pod today. So let's start right at the beginning. How did North Studio come about?
So it came about actually in the middle of COVID, not on purpose. It just my opening date happened to be March 2020, and that obviously never happened. But previous to that, I was working as a personal trainer in a gym in Leeds City Centre. I was also teaching classes in Leeds and Harrogate, and I was working for a company called Sweaty Betty at the time as well. And I was just really passionate for bringing fun fitness classes to Leeds. I'd been all around London, around some of the places in New York and LA. And I just thought, why do we not have anything like this in Leeds? So my main focus was kind of being my own customer and bringing what I wanted to Leeds.
Okay. So how do you go about setting up a studio from scratch?
I mean, it's a lot in so many ways. I think, I had clients from my PT and some of my classes that I taught, but I didn't have like a North Studio client base. And a lot of people, I think, couldn't really understand my vision and where I was going with it. And it wasn't until it was kind of like 6 months in that people were like, oh, now I see what you mean. But, people, I think, thought I was just setting up a gym. And, you're from Leeds, Phil, there's lots of gyms in Leeds. And I think people thought I was just entering this really saturated market. And, I was trying to open this boutique fitness studio, which Leeds had a couple already. But it was fairly new concept for Leeds, whereas it was something that's, so common in London. And I found this building on just behind Street Lane. I grew up in North Leeds, so I knew Street Lane was a really good location to be. And I found this building that had just come on the market, available to rent, and essentially had to get planning permission and then start full building works. It needed a full strip out. It was an office building, so it wasn't fit for purpose at all. And it kind of started end of 2019, and then my building work was finishing early 2020. Started all the marketing for it. And then everything kind of just like came crashing down, and I didn't actually officially open until the August that year.
Oh wow! So how did you go about funding setting up a whole gym?
So funding, I did that through a bank, and I also did all my equipment through finance, which again, it's difficult on cash flow, but now I've paid it off, which is amazing. And there's the stress of that as well. I think when you loan something. So again, I had to do it again when I did Harrogate. So I opened a second site up at the beginning of January, and I had to do it all over again. And I forgot how difficult it is those first few months when you get your loan, how much it impacts your monthly cash flow. And, luckily I'm coming up to in September this year, all my loans and my finance on my equipment, will be paid off, which is an amazing feeling for Harrogate. But, it was really tough the first 6 months in Harrogate because I had all this money going out, even when the customers weren't necessarily coming in, because I started paying my loan off and for my finance and my finance on my equipment before we had customers through the door. So it's tight and it's definitely tough. But I think on the Apprentice, Claude kind of went in on me having bank loans, and he was like, "You've got loans, you've got finance, you've got this," but at the end of the day, it's enabled me to open up my studio. So, people might see loans as a bad thing, but for me, it's good debt to have because it's enabled me to open up a studio, and it's been an amazing facility for me.
Great, that's great. And you mentioned you just sort of like cast over it quite quickly. You were about to open and COVID happened. What did you do?
So immediately had to tell all my instructors that were going to come on board. I don't know how long this is going to go on for, as did, nobody knew. And so that was all put on pause. And I was doing I did a lot of Zoom training. So loads of people were doing online classes on Zoom at the time. So I hopped on with that, and I didn't love it, to be perfectly honest with you, but it was the only way I could earn any money at the time. I was entitled to some help from Leeds City Council, which paid my rent, which was, a massive saviour, really. Because all my I had one landlord at the time, and that landlord, I've got a great relationship with them, but they did want the rent, and fair enough. I know some people got rent breaks, but my rent was due. And it was, thank God, I was entitled to something from Leeds City Council to help pay towards that. And then in the August when we opened, we were still severely restricted because of social distancing. So, my capacity was down by 50%, which again really negatively impacts your cash flow. And my costs were still the same, but the revenues were, impacted by 50%, especially, when you're launching a new business, you're not going to be full anyway. So if you say 50% capacity, and then actually 50% of that is what you'd expect to fill a class. So, maybe I had four in a class sometimes, which just it doesn't touch the sides. So yeah, we opened, and then within 3 months we were closed again because we had a second lockdown. So it was very like open, close, open, close.
Right. Wow. That must be really, really difficult. So you reopened after COVID. How quickly did you get to a position where you thought, actually, this is a real goer?
I mean, in my first month of it, so in August 2020, I mean, I was like, I think I was 24 at the time, 23. I was 23 or 24. And, in the August, we'd taken like £8,000, which to me was like massive money. I was like, oh my gosh, we've taken £8,000. So, yes, I'd invested all the money in, but I thought, actually, if we can do that when we're severely restricted and people have literally just heard of us, it wasn't like, I wouldn't say we were established at all in that month. I thought, okay, well, what can we do once we're fully open? We've got full capacity. And, that I think I knew I was onto something good and people liked it. The problem was I just couldn't go at it as much as I wanted to. And in the November, we had to close for what we thought would be a month. And again, I was entitled to something from the council, which was a massive help. But again, it covered a few months' rent, and that was it. I wasn't paying myself, and my instructors are all self-employed, which meant they weren't on furlough, but I also didn't have that to worry about, which I appreciate is a very fortunate position. But I thought it'd be a month, like everyone. Comes to January, still can't open, and we ended up being closed for a total of 6 months. Where we were just doing online classes. On a weekend, I'd open up and do all the juices and smoothies and the coffees because we were allowed to do that. I could do my personal training from the car park of the building, which I would do. So I'd stand, whatever the weather was, I'd be stood out there in the snow, in the sun, whatever. It wasn't a big money earner at all. I was earning pennies, but for me, it was like I need to work or I'm going to go insane. So it was a really tough period for me mentally. Was that 6 months when we were closed, probably harder than the first lockdown because I got all this momentum, and then there was just no, I mean, you'll remember there was just no guidance as to when we were going to come out of that lockdown at the time. And I was living by myself in a flat, and I had this business, and it was like the lowest period of my life, I'd say. So opening up back in the May 21 was just a relief.
So how did you cope with that? I mean, that's quite, young, on your own, you got a nascent business that's being strangled. How did you cope with all that?
I mean, it was tough. I think it taught me a lot, did COVID, especially living in my flat by myself. And I'm really lucky. My mum and dad are just down the road, and they're so supportive. And I've got loads of friends surrounding me as well. So it wasn't like I didn't have a support system. But I think I felt so low because everybody was still going to work, or at least working from home, and I just felt I had no real purpose. And I think I felt I felt like a failure in that time period. And I think just as we got the momentum in that 12 weeks when we'd opened in the 2020, I was worried, would people go elsewhere after when we reopened? Because I just started building this community, and it was only 12 weeks old. So people haven't fully established relationships with you yet. And yeah, I don't know. I think looking back, I think I just coped with the support of my friends and family around me. And, I'm very lucky. I've got friends that check in on me a lot, and my parents that, literally, like I said, just round the corner. And also, exercise. I'm a big runner. And I think that really kept me positive when I went through some dark times with it all. And I think just I kept thinking in my head, one day this will be over, one day this will be over. And yeah, I think it was tough. It was tough looking back. I'm not entirely sure how I got through it, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time on my bike actually. I did miles and miles and miles on the bike. So okay, so you reopen, and it starts building again. So how did you go about marketing it? Because like you say, where you are, you've got the David Lloyd, you've got the Village, you've got Anytime, you've got Ultraflex, you've got JD, all on your doorstep. How did you go about marketing and getting people to come to you rather than them?
So on the flip side of the negative of COVID, and I've spoken to my mum about this quite a lot recently, people were really health conscious in terms of hygiene at the time. Obviously still are, but they were, people were really conscious of it at the time. And because we were small, people were actually really interested in coming to us. I'd made it really clear that we had really strict social distancing rules. I clean like a freak anyway. So, I think I was I got it all over social media, all over my marketing emails, exactly what processes we were taking to keep people safe. And I think people also, the one thing from COVID that people did take away was supporting independent businesses. And I think on the flip, that really helped me because people, were leaving their memberships at, David Lloyd's a great facility, and I'm not here to bash David Lloyd. I was a member for a long time, but people didn't want to go to big facilities anymore where there was a risk of contracting COVID. So, people wanted to try it out. It was new. We were independent, and I think, don't get me wrong, I had to do my marketing, but people were, I think, more aware of the size of our classes, let's say. And, I had 8 people max in one of my busiest classes, which, that's not a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, it impacts revenue, but it got people in and it got people through the door. And those people that came back in May 21 are still with us now.
So now the business is up and running and it's building. Was expanding into somewhere like Harrogate always the plan, or did that just sort of come about?
I mean, it did just come about. I think when I first opened, the first priority was kind of making sure Leeds was successful, especially given the time period I'd launched in. And, I can't sit still. I'm the kind of person that I'm always looking for the next thing. And I think we were 2 years in, or I think we were a couple of years in, and I was actually out in Harrogate, and I'd seen this unit up for lease, and I thought, what a perfect spot for an old studio. Went and viewed it, and like as soon as I walked in, I just knew it was right. So provisionally kind of took that, got all the relevant planning permission, and then started the build on Harrogate. And I think the thing I liked about it was I'd worked in Harrogate before, so I knew the gyms and what was kind of available. And again, I felt like it maybe lacked what we had over in Roundhay. And it was also quite easy for me to get to without, spreading myself too far. So that the beauty of Harrogate was it was, 20, 25 minutes away.
So expanding into Harrogate, and I know this question came up on The Apprentice. How do you ensure, that quality and that personal touch that you've got in Leeds happens in Harrogate as well?
I mean, that was definitely my first concern because it's all great that everybody loved the service in Leeds, but I can't just open another gym in Harrogate, which, there was plenty of gyms to go to. And I think the key thing was making sure I had the same staff in both, not necessarily all of them, but some of them. So at least they knew what I liked. They knew how I liked the classes teaching, the quality, etc. So, I had people working at multiple sites. And for me, just overseeing that, exactly what I'd done in Leeds, replicating that, but to also fit that market. And I think, it's taken a good year for us to establish ourselves in that market. We opened up in January 2023. We're now in April, and it's taken up until early this year to really get some good revenue out the place, and also, establish ourselves in the market. And it's now at a point where, Leeds was when when I saw the Harrogate site on the market, which is amazing. And it's come at a good time since I've just won the Apprentice, and we're looking to expand the business further. But I think the main thing is the staff training, and I'm really quite almost too strict with how I like things doing. And my team have got so much respect for me, and they're brilliant at replicating how I want things doing. And I think for me, it's just having those regular check-ins with everyone and making sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay, so from a timeline point of view, you've just said you opened January 2023. What's the timeline on The Apprentice then? So, because I know you record, is it 6 months before? So when did The Apprentice start recording, and how did that impact Harrogate?
So I went to film The Apprentice last April to June, obviously with no idea how long I was going to go for. I actually said to my mum in the April, I was like, okay, I'll be back in a few weeks. And then I came back like 9 weeks later. So it was, with a show like The Apprentice, you just don't know. You could go in week one, you could stay the whole time. And I obviously ended up staying the whole time. But, that was the toughest thing I've ever done, leave it. I've been on holiday and everything since I started my business, but I've always had my laptop with me. I've always checked in with everybody, but I had no phone, so the month leading up, I had a month between finding out I was on the show and leaving. And in that month, it was just dedicated to prepping so I could leave. And, it was hard because I couldn't tell people where I was going. I never have, an automatic email that says I'm out of office. I've never had an out of office in my life. And I had to put, I'm away from my emails with no access to them. It sounded so dodgy, but it was the 4 weeks in preparation to going to The Apprentice was tough. I had to prepare a business plan for The Apprentice itself, and then I had to prepare my actual business for me leaving for potentially 2 months, which is what I did. So, but I think leaving it has actually given me a new sense of like, actually things can run because I've set things up to run well without me.
And we'll come on to The Apprentice in a minute, but what did you tell people? Yeah, it's a weird thing to say. I'm going away. I don't know when I'll be back. Was that it? Was that how you did it?
So my family knew where I was going, and a couple of my friends. Everyone that knew had basically signed an NDA, and then the program tell you to just say, you're on jury service, something that's believable that you're going to not be in contact for people for like a good reason why you're not going to be in contact. But obviously, like 2 weeks, 4 weeks passed, 6 weeks passed, and people did not believe I was on jury service. So I think there was a few things going around the rumour mill in North Leeds about where I was, which they all managed to find out finally where I was in January this year when they released the names. But yeah, that was one of the hardest things. And my mum works for me, and she had to lie to so many people. And my mum is like the sweetest person you would ever meet, and it did not come naturally having to say I was on jury service to her.
So when you came back, what did you say? Because obviously people go, well, hang on, she's been away for 8 weeks. What is this? Do people sort of start putting two and two together then?
Not at all. People thought I'd been poorly, and there was all sorts of assumptions, but the last assumption was The Apprentice. And it was hard for that 6 months because I had to run with what people thought I'd potentially been doing. One of my clients thought I'd been in prison. That was quite funny. But it was actually really difficult coming back in some ways because I finished filming on the Sunday night at say like 6 o'clock in London. And then I started working in Round Day again at 7 a.m. on the Monday morning. And I had to it was quite weird being thrown back into my emails, my phone, my clients, my staff. And the first 2 weeks, I had to answer a lot of questions. And then after that, people kind of forgot. But that was a tough period actually of time. And I would not want to do that again because I'm so straight up. I hate lying to people. And I actually had to lie for good reason, but it wasn't fun.
Yeah. And just to clarify, and I know this is sort of fairly general information, but people who don't know, you record both endings, don't you? That you've won and that you've lost. So actually, when you came back on that Monday, you didn't know you'd won, did you?
No. So I filmed the final boardroom on the Sunday where I won and Phil wins, and then back to work on the Monday. Like I'd been in this boardroom with Lord Sugar and Phil, and then I'm literally back to work as normal in Round Day the next day. It was the most bizarre feeling, and I can't explain how bizarre it was.
Right. Wow. Right. We'll get on to The Apprentice. But before we do, I want to tell our listeners about the Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. The Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal has two sides to it. My side of the deal is every week I bring you inspirational, motivational, and fascinating guests for free, like Rachel. Your side of the deal, listeners and viewers, has two parts to it. Part number one, recommend this podcast to one other person you think would get a benefit from it. And part number two, make sure you post a review on the app on which you're listening or watching this on. So that's the Leeds Business Podcast Fair Deal. Sound like a fair deal, Rachel?
Sounds like a very fair deal. And I've got a few people I actually need to listen to that have been on your podcast, actually. So I'll be recommending.
Fantastic. Right. So let's get on to The Apprentice. So let's start with the first bit. Why did you apply?
I think sometimes when I was in the process, I asked myself the same question. I've watched it for a long time, and I've always thought, like everyone else, oh my gosh, they are so stupid, or why are they doing that? They look like an idiot. And I think we've all been there and watched The Apprentice and thought, I could do that better, or why did they not do X, Y, Z? And then you do it, and it's a whole different thing. It's the toughest thing I've ever done. It was tougher than setting up my business. For so many reasons, one of which being away from my family and my friends for so long, but also the pressure you are under. There is no access to things that you usually rely on day to day. I use my iPhone calculator twice a day at least. There is no calculators. I Google things all the time. If there's a term I don't understand at work, or if I need to quickly know something, I'll just Google it or search for it on social media. There is none of that. And I think everything is stripped away from you, and you literally are left with limited resources. Hence why sometimes when you're watching it, you are like, why are they doing that? And now I understand. So now I will, when I watch it next year, I will watch it from a completely different standpoint. And I think the people that go on it, not everyone, but the people that go on it do deserve a lot more credit than they get, because it is a really, really tough process.
So was it just? I mean, I've sat there, and you know my kids. They both said, "Why do you go on?" Obviously, I'm too old to go on. But was it simply just that I could do better, or did you actually think, "Oh, I could do with Lord Sugar mentoring me, or I could do with the 250 grand"? Was it just the challenge of going on first?
I think it was a variety of things. Again, back to that, I can't sit still. I was a bit bored. I had just opened up Harrogate, but I think I needed something to I don't know, I needed a challenge. I always need a challenge. And I think I was ready for something new. And, I think to have a business partner like Lord Sugar, I knew what the positives of that could bring. But I think going, with a little bit of lack of self-esteem that I sometimes struggle with, I don't think I ever thought I would win it. Other people around me thought I could. So I'm not, it wasn't like it was impossible, but my fiance Ben, he was like, from the second you applied, I knew you'd win. And he said that to me in the interviews. And I remember thinking, what's he on about? And my dad said it. My dad had said, you'll win it if you go on it, by the way. And I didn't think as highly of myself as I probably should, but I think I'd gone on it for a new challenge, not thinking that I'd come out the bloody winner.
Right. Okay. So you've been through the application process. You've obviously been told you're on. Day one, what happens? Talk us through. You turn up with your case. What happens?
So you straight into the boardroom. You don't meet any of the candidates. You don't meet Lord Sugar beforehand. You are like, you see it. The cameras see it how we see it, and that is you straight into the boardroom, and you're all introducing yourselves. And all 18 of us introduced ourselves, but you saw maybe 5 of them in actual episode 1. But we were there for a few hours, and it was tense. And it was the first time I've seen Lord Sugar, Karen, and Tim, and the candidates. And I think I was emotional. I'd left my family, and I had to spend a few days in isolation, as did all the others, before we went in to the boardroom, just because of COVID at the time. There was still some COVID protocol there. And, it was an emotional few days. I'd had my phone taken off me, and I was like, what have I done?
So when you turn up in that boardroom, that's the first time you see everybody else. You don't meet each other or anything like that, just straight in.
So there's that bit where you're in the waiting area before you go in, and everyone was just eyeing each other up and, like working each other out. Like, that's the first time you've seen each other. So you're like, who have I got? Who's my competition here? So everyone was eyeing each other up. It was funny, really, looking back.
So you go in the boardroom, obviously do your intros. What's the task turnaround like? Because is it 1 a week? Is it 2 a week? How does that work?
It was minimum 2, sometimes 3. It's such a quick turnaround, and that's something I didn't really understand about television. Like, it's fast paced, and that is part of why it's such a pressurized process. You don't get the time off is very minimal, which you actually want that. I didn't want a lot of time off because I didn't want time to have to be like, how's business, how's this. I wanted to just get on with why I'd left my family. I hadn't left as a, for me it wasn't a joke, it was serious, and I was like, I don't want to be sat having time off when I could be at work or with my family. So I was actually fine with the quick turnaround, and I'd rather just get on with it. And I was all for, the quick turnaround. So yeah, it's a big filming process, and the total thing is filmed in 9 weeks, and there's a lot squished into that 9 weeks.
Wow. And in the house, is it remote cameras, or is there a camera team in there with you?
Yeah, so we have a camera team living in with us, and we have we have one camera person living in with us, and then we also have a house team who basically, they're there for your welfare, to look after you, and also to make sure you go to bed on time, because there was strict bedtimes. Obviously, we're up early.
Right. Okay. So I've got to ask the question. I know you've been answered it 1,000 times. Does the phone ring at 5 o'clock, and have you got 20 minutes to get ready?
Right. Put it this way: 5 a.m. was a lie-in. If we were told it was going to be a 5 a.m. start, I was buzzing. It was more, there was 2, 3, 4 a.m. starts, which I'm used to an early start with what I do for my job. But that was, it was early starts, but you've got a lot of filming to get in. It's not because they're trying to catch you out. Like, there's a lot to do. You're designing products or creating, services or brands within 2 days that would usually take 6 months. So there's a lot to do, if that makes sense.
Right. And just from your point of view, obviously I know who you are, and as soon as you read it, go, oh, we're watching Rachel. You seem to have quite a quiet start and then sort of built into the process. Was that how it felt to you, or was that just the way they edited it?
I personally feel it's the way it was edited. I was the same. I was consistent throughout the process. I think the thing with the apprentices, the loud ones and the ones that have to shout the loudest in the room to get their point come across, have the most airtime at the beginning, but also leave at the beginning. Whereas I stayed quite calm the whole time. I only spoke when it was something valuable. I didn't speak to be like, look at me, or for airtime. I spoke, when I thought I had something to say. If I didn't have something to say, I didn't speak. And, episode 1, for example, we were in Scotland, and me and the girls in the water, we were taking these clients through this gorge walking experience. I was in my element. I loved it. We were great with the clients. They had a great time, but you didn't see that because, it's the good stuff, if that makes sense. Nobody wants to see the good stuff. They want to see the breadcrumbs getting mixed up with the rhubarb crumble. I wasn't there, but the kitchen was manic for the girls. So, they showed more of the girls on that side of the team rather than my side of the team. So, yeah, my parents said that, I didn't get much airtime till about episode 4, but I actually, in hindsight, it was a good thing.
Yeah. And so in terms of, and obviously, it's a TV program, it's car crash TV. When you watched, I assume you watched the program when we watch it. Mm-hmm. When you were watching it, how much did you feel that reflected what happened during the task, or were you sort of watching it going, no, it didn't happen like that?
I mean, everything you see obviously happens. And there's only so much, we do like 3 days of filming, and there's only so much you can put into an hour's episode. So there's things that were missed out that I was like, oh, I remember that being a really good moment for me. And you watch selfishly, obviously, I watch for myself, and there's bits that I was like, oh, I wish they'd have shown this and that. But it's not, you've got to remember at the beginning there's 18 people, and they've got to show everybody. And I think they were, I wouldn't say I was, unfairly done or anything. I think it was just they have to tell a certain story, and I think my team were the winning team for 6 or 7 weeks on the trot, and the winning team always get less airtime, and the losing team always gets a little bit more.
Yeah.
So when my team lost, that was the first time I actually got some really decent, and apart from Formula E, actually I got some decent airtime. But when my team lost, I got some good airtime because they're learning to see how you can cope with pressure as well.
Sure. What was your favourite task, and what was it like being project manager?
I loved Formula E because we were out talking to people, and that will always be my favourite thing. I love being out and about and chatting to people. I don't really love being behind the computer or being in a kitchen. That is just no. So Formula E, I loved it. I was in my element, speaking to people and selling them parts of the car. And then Budapest, when I was project manager, I really enjoyed it. You know, we lost, but I loved it because again, I was out speaking to people, and it was just a shame that we didn't sell the tickets for the right price. But I still have really fond memories of that, and I think it was the first time Lord Sugar could maybe learn a bit more about how I work. And I'm honest, you know, I'll own if I've done something wrong, I'll own it. I'm not going to lie and throw people under the bus. I'll always own my failures, and you know, I did. I think I said in that one, you know, maybe I should have gone on the pricing team, or maybe I should have told them, maybe I should have really drilled how much I wanted that price. But I never felt at risk in that episode because we came back in and he was like, "You're okay, but these two are going to have to fight it out." So I think I felt quite safe when I got back from that.
Right. Okay. Was there any time where you really thought, oh, I might be on the block here?
Yeah, twice. I think after episode 10, which is the last task, it's that vegan alternative to cheese. I'd had enough by then, to be perfectly honest. I wanted to talk about my business. I was so done with creating products in industries I knew nothing about. I ended up being project manager by default because nobody would take it. And then obviously the one that takes responsibility and decides to be project manager ends up with the head on the block. And I knew what the risk was. And part of me thought I was probably going to go home because we lost. But I think, again, he saw I was fair, and you know, and I didn't start blaming the people. I said, yeah, I was project manager, so I am partly to blame for this. But I think I really, at that point, I started fighting for my business, and I was just like, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm done with these tasks now, but I can talk to you about my business all day. And yeah, I think that was probably one of the only times I really felt at risk.
Right. And what? And this is not asking you to be big-headed at all, but at what point in the process did you think, hang on a minute, I could win this? When did you really start believing?
Honestly, I mean, after the final 5 interviews, you know, I'd packed my bag. So what had happened was we did our interviews, and then the next day you have the boardroom. So you straight into it after the interviews. And I'd never put anything in my little suitcase before. So we have those little suitcases that we take to the boardroom. And if you're fired, you go, you know, you're immediately out the house, and you have to have some pajamas and your toothbrush or whatever to stay in a hotel that night. And then you can get your stuff the next day. That was the first time I packed my stuff, and I genuinely packed my little bag. I thought, brilliant, I'm on that train to Leeds in the morning. You know, I had that final 5 was tough, and I knew I was up against some really good people, and I think I'd had a really big grilling that day, as had all of us, and I think maybe I should have had a bit more belief in myself. Actually, looking back, that's my one regret. And I'd packed my little bag to go home to Leeds for a few days because I knew I'd have to come back because all the candidates come back for the final episode. And I got it in my head. I told Flo, who I shared a room with, and she was really telling me off. She was like, you need to sort yourself out. She was like, you are going into that final, you know, stop doubting yourself. She was brilliant with me. And I could not quite believe it when I got into the final. And then I think once I was into the final, I never thought I had it in the bag, not once, but I knew, you know, I had a good chance. And I think as soon as I could start talking about something I was passionate about, you know, I knew I could finally show Lord Sugar who I was, and it wasn't just about tasks and random products and services I knew nothing about.
You've just mentioned interview day. What's that really like?
I mean, it's no matter how much you have to say business is business and personal is personal, you take it personal because somebody is going in on something I put the best part of 4 years into. And it, you know, my business is my life. It sounds sad, but I do, you know, I love my life, but I don't have much of a life outside of work at the minute. You know, it's my whole life for the past 4 years has been dedicated to North Studio. And I think for someone to go in on you on that, it obviously hurts. But I also had a good day because it sounds mad and you don't see this part, but the interviewers don't just grill you the whole time. You know, they are kind about some aspects of your business. And, you know, I'd had a mystery visitor, which Mike Suter had organised, and it had gone really successfully. You know, he said they loved your instructor, they loved the studio, they loved the smoothie, they loved this, that, and the other, but they didn't show it. But, you know, it was really like heartwarming for me to know that business was good because I had no idea that these two women had been down to the studio. It was Mike feeding me it all back to me, and it was a really bizarre feeling actually because I've been away from home for a couple of months at this point, So, that was lovely. And then Linda Plant, she, immediately, I think her and I warmed to each other because we had the Leeds connection. And we had a really nice interview. You saw probably 30-second snippet where she just said, how are you gonna replicate yourself, which is a completely fair comment. But, for the most part of my interview with her, she was really complimentary, and, she really credited me for my hard work. So I think it's a difficult day, and I think your confidence is on the floor a little bit when you come out, though, and hence why the next day in the boardroom, I thought I might be going home.
Right. I mean, it does look. I've watched it every year, and it looks scary just watching it. But I think it's like going for any job interview or anything like that. There's going to be people prodding and poking, and there's going to be difficult bits. And obviously, it's car crash TV, so they show the difficult bits, not the nice bits.
100%, 100%. And the difficult bits, quite rightly so. There's 250 grand up for grabs, and I think they have to get to know you, and they also need to see how you can cope with pressure and can you answer questions. And I remember Claude said to me at the end, he was like, "You've actually got an answer for everything." And I went, "I know." I might be pulling it out of nowhere, but I've always I'll be able to try. I'll always try my best to answer something, and that I should. It's my business, and I should really. Any good business person should really be able to answer any question.
Yeah.
Or at least say, "I'll find that out for you."
Yeah. I mean, you've just mentioned Linda. I interviewed her on here. I think she was my first episode, and she said she used a great line, which was she used a great line, and she said, "If you give me a business plan that's wreckable, I'll wreck it." And I think that's a really good point. That it's your business plan. You've got to make sure it works. And we saw that with Trey with the business plan of a product he never produced and knew nothing about.
I know. I mean, he knew he was going to get absolutely grilled. The second he was into the final five, he was buzzing, but it was also like, oh, I'm actually going to have to. They're going to see my plan now. So I think he knew he was going to get grilled, and I think Linda is correct in you've got to scrutinise these things because there's a big investment at the other side of it, and it shouldn't be easy. Getting a 250 grand capital investment into your business should not be easy.
Yeah. So, you've mentioned it already. You film Phil, I'm hiring you. Rachel, I'm hiring you. How do you actually get told? At what point do you then get told, yeah, you're the winner? And how did you find out, and what did that feel like?
I found out, the day we filmed You're Hired, and it's been a really emotional year, really waiting to find out. And I think the one thing that knocked my confidence, and it shouldn't have done in the grand scheme of things, was when we were in that final five boardroom, people were throwing numbers around like my business takes X amount, X millions a year, and my business doesn't do anything like that. I'm a, you've seen the size of my lead site. It was, my revenue was 250 grand a year. These people were talking like 2.5 million a year. Do you know what I mean? So it was, I think I'd heard these numbers. You just thought, well, why is he going to want my little business that's got that amount? And these lot are all throwing these massive figures around, which, I can't compete against at the end of the day. And that was probably what knocked my confidence the most. And Phil's got a big business, and it's a family business. It's been running for a long time. They know what they're doing. They've got big revenues coming in. And I think for last year my thoughts were that would that be the easier one to go with, and I think naturally you kind of scrutinise why they won't go for you. But then the other side of it is my business is young. I am ready to go, and I'm ready to take on new projects all the time. I'm hungry for it to grow. And I think that's probably why I ended up winning in the end, because my passion for it and my hunger to grow North Studio, it's on the incline. Whereas I think Phil's maybe a little bit stagnant at the moment, and he's kind of happy with how things run, if that makes sense.
Sure. So how do they actually tell you? How do you actually get told, right, actually, you are the winner?
Lord Sugar told me on the phone.
Oh, so he rings up and goes, "Hi, it's Lord Sugar here. By the way, you've won." Is that it?
Yeah, he literally called me on the blower and told me I've won the show. I'm not even joking. Yeah.
Oh my God, where were you when he rang you?
I was in the studio in London because it's the day we film You're Hired. So it was all the same day. So I knew he was caught. Like I knew it wasn't like a shock. I knew he was calling me that. That's within that time period.
Right. Okay. So what's happened so far from Lord Sugar's investment in the business? Have you done any work with him? Has he put the money in? What's actually happened from a real point of view?
So I've been asked this a lot in my interviews in the last week, and it's not something we've been able to proceed with until it was public knowledge that I've won, if that makes sense. So this, yeah. So this is now it. We can finally now start talking about what we want to do, and I'm so glad, because I feel like I've been suppressed for a few weeks, that I can't talk about what I want to do. And I think I'd made out to a few people that I was runner up because I kept such a good poker face. So I've been quite on the quiet about what I want to do, but ultimately open another site, so another full-blown North studio site. In terms of location, that's to be confirmed. I think the most important thing is, I can't replicate myself, and I know that, and it needs to be something that I can access. And I need to be at the forefront of the new site at least for 6 months, because that's what I had to do for my other two sites. And I'm never going to ditch any of them. It's really important that I have. My mum always says, you need your presence in every single one. And today, for example, I've already been at both studios. And that's not necessarily the case every day of the week, but I'm always in at least one every day. And wherever this third site is, Yorkshire is kind of what we're looking at. The same case applies. And I think the next thing for me is to open a standalone reformer Pilates studio, because that is absolutely massive. And it's something I've been looking to do for the last year, but I've kind of been waiting around to see if I'd won the show or not. So, I think it's nice that I can now, instead of being like, if this happens or if that happens, now I kind of know where I'm going, if that makes sense.
Right. I get that. So how is his mentorship going to work? Have they laid that out? Do you get like a weekly phone call with him, or monthly, or do you just deal with his team? How have they explained how that's going to work?
I mean, I get full access to his resources and his advice, and his advisors as well, which is amazing. And I think I cannot tell you how much I'd not realised since the last few days just what an opportunity I've been given. I appreciate it's a lot of money, like that's one thing, but for me, it's like the other opportunities that come with it, which is his advice and his ideas. And don't get me wrong, I'm the industry expert when it comes to that, but in terms of actual business and suggestions and ideas, I can't tell you what an opportunity like I've been given. And I think it's only kind of just hit me over the last few days when we started to talk about what we're going to do moving forwards with the business.
Brilliant. Now, just to timeline this, we're recording this Wednesday, and we all heard about it Thursday, so it's not even been a week yet. What's the media frenzy been like?
Gosh, a mix. The media is an amazing tool, but it's also, it can be quite a negative thing as well. And the media in general has been amazing, and it's the promo it's given North Studio, and what we do is incredible. We've got a lot of new people coming through the doors, which you can't complain about, and it's been amazing for business. And certainly my profile as well, getting asked to do different things, and which is really exciting. It's something that I'm open to doing, like charity bits, etc. And then then there's the other side of it, which I think I've personally had a little bit of negativity on my Instagram, which I was warned about. One of the main things I was warned about was this year I was the only female in the final, and very sadly the media are more interested in females and kind of like the takedown of us as such. And I think I was ready for some negativity, but I've had a few people say, I only won because I'm a woman, or they were ticking a box, or why am I the sixth female winner? And I think it's such a shame we're still having to have that conversation, because it shouldn't even be a thing. I think it's such. You've got two daughters, Phil, so like it's a representation of the workplace now, and I think and rightly so. So I think that's the only downside of it. I've seen that not everyone wants the success of women, I think. So that's been a bit of a hard thing to get my head around, actually.
And I know you've been on Good Morning Britain, and you've been on Radio 4 Women's Hour, and what's the best? I mean, give us a list of all the stuff you've been on.
Oh gosh, so the last week or 2 weeks, I've done This Morning, BBC Breakfast, Look North. I've done loads. Like I did about 16 radio interviews last Friday. I've done Harpreet, who won it 2 years ago. I did her TV show. I've done Phil's podcast, the Leeds Business podcast. I've got a few different podcasts coming up. So it's honestly like that bit is amazing. People are so lovely and supportive, and I think that's what I've got to remember, how supportive people are, especially, they say there's no support like Leeds support, and it is so true. The northern support, people just, I think people keep saying, "Oh, well done for putting Leeds on the map," and Leeds has been on the map for a long time. But I think it's nice that people can. I think people can relate to you more when when you're from up here, because it's just, I'm just a typical Leeds girl, I think. So people, I think people really like seeing the northern representation on the TV.
Brilliant. How much support or guidance have you had from the BBC PR team, and other things you can and can't say?
I mean, there's always things you can and can't say. I have signed a lot of legal documentation, but the press team have been amazing. So they are independent of the BBC, but they are just. I've worked with two lovely people, Jenny and Patrick. Their company's called Organic, and they have been beyond amazing at pointing you in the right direction and making sure that you really benefit out of this period. And now now I've got Andrew Block, who is doing all my media and PR opportunities, and again he's absolutely brilliant. So I've had amazing support around me, and people genuinely just want you to do well, and really, I mean, there's no other way to say it other than milk this period of my life, because in a year's time, the good thing about this show is in a year's time, people kind of move on and there's someone new. So I think I've got to really take every opportunity that comes my way in the next year. And, number one priority is North Studio and the success of that. But, making sure, if something could potentially benefit North Studio, then, saying yes.
Right. What's the oddest thing that's happened so far?
Oddest thing? So Ben and I were in London on Sunday, stood outside Claridge's Hotel, which we hadn't stayed at because we don't spend that kind of money on hotels. And someone took photos of me and Ben, and Daily Mail then put an article saying that we'd been splashing Lord Sugar's cash in Claridge's, which was absolute nonsense. We'd like, I've not, I would. It's a business transaction, Lord Sugar and I's, the capital. It's nothing to do with what I spend personally. And secondly, Ben and I do not spend that kind of money on hotels in London. So I thought that we're laughing at that now because it's just funny. Like, someone's got pictures of us walking out the hotel. I thought, what's funny though? Adam Sandler was staying there. So I think somebody was waiting for him, and then they've obviously become really disappointed when I've walked out.
Right. Before we finish, I put a call out on LinkedIn this week for anybody to suggest questions to ask to you. So I've picked the 5 best ones. So really quick. So Mike Hall said, on a task such as branding, how long do you actually get with the designer? I'm assuming he's basing that on the fact that most of the designs you guys do were pretty crap.
Agreed. So, I mean, we never had a watch, so I couldn't tell you precisely, but it's less than 2 hours.
Question from Zandra Moore, who's also been a guest on the show. And you've touched on this, but she says, who were your role models and who inspired you growing up? And do you now feel that visible role models matter? And do you now see yourself as one?
So cliche, definitely my mum and dad. My dad with his business was a massive influence on me. And I think I definitely want to set up a business if I didn't have him in my life, just because he had me in work from being like 12. And that was when my passion for business really grew. I always wanted a business, and I don't think I would have wanted those things had I have not had my dad in my life. So definitely my dad, and he's still a great mentor to me now. And if I need help, and my mum was always very supportive of anything I went, whatever alley I wanted to go down, as long as I worked hard. That was their one condition. And then, do I see myself as a role model? I think, maybe, I don't know. I think I've had some lovely messages from younger girls wanting to set up businesses, who are still at school and not sure what to do, and who say they're inspired by me, which is lovely. I mean, I don't know if I see myself as that just yet. Maybe in 5 years' time, when I'm a little bit more, established. But if that's the case, then that's lovely. And hopefully, I can inspire more young girls to get involved in business and not just think it's a man's world.
Okay. My next question was do you have 20 minutes to get ready at 5 o'clock? We've done that one. But thank you, Wayne Jackson, for that one. Marshall Fries, who was a guest last week, actually, he says, who would you have hired and why?
If it wasn't me?
Yeah.
I would have hired Trey, because if you put him in the right business or the right role, he'd make you millions.
Right. Okay. But not his man juice.
Not the man juice. I wouldn't invest in man. I'd invest. Trey is very investable, but not the man juice.
Right. Okay. Okay. And last question here. Sandy Domingos Shipley says, from all the tasks you have done, what are your biggest lessons learnt about yourself and your skills? Good question, Sandy.
Remaining calm and confident is a much better response than reacting chaotically. Take a breath, think, speak calmly, and the rest will follow.
Excellent. And that leads us quite nicely into our weekly how-to, where we ask all our guests to give us a how-to. So, Rachel, tell us what you're going to teach us how to do, and then teach us how to do it.
So, linked back to the Apprentice, and things I get asked a lot is, how are you going to make sure that your service is consistent across all your sites? So, I guess my how-to is how to avoid complacency. And I think my biggest piece of advice with that would be, don't take your eye off the ball. When you start making decent money, or when you're getting all these amazing customer reviews through and you're busy, don't think that the hard work is done. It's kind of just starting, because actually being busy is also hard to maintain, because you've got to keep the quality of your service, you've got to look after your clients, and the service has to remain the same. So, in essence, to avoid complacency, never think you can take your eye off the ball. Always, for me, the example would be visiting both sites very frequently, every day, if not every other day.
Okay. And just to take that a step further, as the business grows, how are you going to ensure that? Because, let's say you've got 3 or 4 or 5 sites. Are you going to be able to do that Are you going to be able to do that consistently, and are you going to be able to ensure the consistency?
I think my key things to remain consistent across all the sites is have multiple so some of the same instructors in multiple sites, so they can carry what we've already successfully done. And then also the staff training, which is really key for us. And stay every month or so going through what's to be expected, taking feedback from my staff, which is massive. They have so many great ideas that we've implemented, and I by no means think I'm right all the time. I think it's really important to get their ideas, get my clients' ideas, and implement what people believe, because at the end of the day, my instructors know the best what the clients love and what they don't love. And I think it's about just making sure that we've got a really open discussion with everybody. And I think I'm always like, there's no stupid question. If you're not sure how to do something in a class or on the till or whatever it is, even if you're 4 years in, which some of my staff are, just ask. And I think, remaining open.
Fantastic. The other thing we always ask our guests on Leeds Business Podcast is to give a shout out to another Leeds business. So who are you going to give a shout out to?
Well, Phil, if I don't shout out for Stoneacre Properties, I think I won't have a fiance. So shout out to Stoneacre Properties in Chapel Allerton.
How did I know you were going to say Stoneacre Properties? There will be a link to Ben and Stoneacre in the show notes. You're allowed to shout at whoever you want. The fact that you're engaged to him doesn't matter.
Yeah. If I didn't, I think I'd be in big trouble.
Right. Okay. That's absolutely great. And I just want to leave with this, because, as I said, we put a call out for questions for you, and somebody wrote this, and I just wanted you to hear this. And it was, I won't mention who said it, because she'll come and tell you if she wants to. She said, I don't have a question, but I'm one of the original members of Rachel's Leeds gym, and she's a very impressive woman. She started a business aged 24 or thereabouts and is so driven and committed whilst also being incredibly warm, people-orientated and empathetic. She attracts and keeps her clients for the service ethic and the personal service. She knows everyone's names. She's also very smart, savvy and funny. She's learnt on her feet, sometimes the hard way, and I can't wait to see what she's achieved in another 10 years.
Oh, that's really made me emotional. How kind is that?
There we go. And we'll leave this week's episode with a tear in our eye. Rachel, it's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Oh, hopefully speak again soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you found it interesting, inspiring, and of use. To make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, please subscribe to the show. Go on, do it now. Do it now before you go off and do something else. Thank you. Much appreciated. Oh, and don't forget our fair deal. See you next week.